Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum viewers. We begin our Islam study circle for today. The Quranic verse that we're going to discuss is verse 35 from Surah Ma'idah, and it reads, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu taqullaha wabtaghu ilayhi al-wasila wajahidu fi sabilihi la'allakum tuflihun. Believers, fear God and seek His nearness, and for this strive for His cause, so that you may prosper. So this is a very important verse vis-a-vis procuring God's nearness, and it says that in order to procure God's nearness, we have to strive for His cause, so that mankind can prosper. Now, as far as striving for His cause is concerned, of course, this has a background. And as far as the background is concerned, it is very evident that in order to come closer to God, in order to become strongly connected to God, it is essential that we realize that as human beings, we need this God connection. We need the strong support, or in fact, the strongest support. And this strongest support can only be provided by the omnipotent, the omniscient, all-knowing God. This is because all other supports are temporary. All other people or all other beings on whom we can depend upon, they are all temporary in their support. They are all transient. The only everlasting support we can have is God. And therefore, we are told that because of the fact that we are weak human beings and we need each other's support, so although it does not say that we should not have each other's support, of course, as human beings, all of us need one another. But at the same time, the strongest support that we can have is that of God. And precisely that is the reason that we are asked to depend upon God. And we have to procure His nearness. And when we say that we have to procure His nearness, it actually means that we have to have a very strong God connection. This strong God connection, as we have been discussing at a number of in a number of sessions, is actually the measure of our own inner purification. The stronger our God connection, the stronger we become purified, the more we become purified from our own inside. And the Quranic term of tazkiyah actually refers to this, that we have to find ourselves to be clean human beings from our inside, from our own heart. And this is where it is most important to realize that this strong God connection is the strongest when we connect to God through His own word, and which is the Quran. So having a strong God connection with the Quran and having the Quran before us in various formats, in various scenarios. Thus, for example, we have to read the Quran by understanding its message. We should memorize parts of its verses so that we are able to read them off and on, especially in the prayer. And then we have to reflect on the Quran as far as we can. The more we reflect, the more deeper we'll go into its meaning. And the Quran presents itself to be a very deep book once you start reflecting on it. The deeper you reflect on the Quran, the more meaning you find in the Quran. So it is essential that we have this multiple relationship with the Quran. And as I said, these multiple relationships with the Quran, these multi-level relationships with the Quran have their own impact. They bring us closer to God. And then, of course, is the matter of the prayer itself. And as far as the obligatory prayers are concerned, the mandatory prayers are concerned, we all know them. The more we are involved in these prayers, the more we find ourselves to be attentive in these prayers, the more they are effective in building our personality. We have to be more attentive in the prayer. Every time that we stand up on the prayer mat, we have to remind ourselves that we are in the presence of the Supreme God. And if we keep our attention focused, we'll derive the most benefit out of it. Of course, serving human beings, because they are creatures of God, because they are the creation of God, is another method of coming closer to God. When we think of other people, when we put the needs of other people before our needs, when we always have this inclination that besides our own needs, besides what we would like to have in our own lives, we think of others also. And this is something special, and this is something which especially the Quran wants us to do. And it says that people, especially who have been blessed with the Quran, and we have been blessed with various blessings and various favors, they have to repay these favors. And these favors can be repaid if we are always attentive to the fact that there are people in our society who need this help. In fact, it's not just people who come to us and ask for their needs should we be attentive to. In fact, we should be proactive in this. We should go into the society. We should find out people who might need us. And it's not always the case that you have to empty your pocket to help someone. It's not always the case. In fact, that is the easiest way to do. More difficult is to listen to a person, is to give him or her a shoulder where he or she can rest and actually share the woes he or she might be going through. Accepting people as your own brethren, giving them this feeling that they are wanted. And then if you're not able to help someone, there's always this availability that you must speak to other people. There are so many options available to us. We have our own friends, we have our own acquaintances. So connecting them to these people and merely working as an intermediary is also always possible. It's not just that we have to help people directly. If we can, of course, there's nothing like it. But many a time, you just need to connect people to other people. And for this, you have to have that sympathy, that compassion, that inner connectivity to an individual. So these are some of the ways through which we can procure God's nearness. And let me also clarify one thing, that this particular verse has also become something which has always been discussed by many scholars as well and many people as well, because of the word wasila. You see, people generally translate this word wasila as an intermediary, which means someone who can take us to God. And this, of course, is not the correct meaning. In Arabic, the word wasila does not mean an intermediary the way it generally does in Urdu language. In the Urdu language, it's in the Arabic language, it means nearness. So it's like when it says wabtaghu ilayhi al-wasila, it does not mean that you procure God's intermediary or someone who would take us to God as an intermediary. So this is one correction that we have to make, and this is often the case because we don't realize that at times words which are used in two languages may have different meanings. For example, I have often given you this example that the word ghaliz in Arabic actually refers to something which is very thick and very strong, and that is why marriage is called misaqan ghaliza, a strong bond. And we very well know that the word ghaliz has a very different meaning in the Urdu language, and that is, it means filthy and dirty. So the word is the same, but it has different meanings in different languages. Precisely the word wasila here has to be understood that in the Urdu language it might mean an intermediary, but in the Arabic language it means nearness. And of course, the stress here is that people who fear God, they should try and strive to procure His nearness, to come closer to Him, to have this connection as strong as they can. The next part of our study circle is the hadith of the day, and it is reported in the Al-Jami al-Sahih of Imam Muslim, and it is reported by Amr ibn Auf. It says, أخبره أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال فوالله ما الفقر أخشى عليكم ولكني أخشى عليكم أن تبسط الدنيا عليكم كما بسطت على من كان قبلكم فتنافسوها كما تنافسوها وتهلككم كما أهلكتم. So Amr ibn Auf reported that God's messenger said, by God, it is not poverty which I fear for you. However, I fear that you be given abundance in wealth the way those before you were given. Then you begin to compete with one another for them as they did, and this may destroy you as it destroyed them. So this is actually a very strong warning which is sounded to us by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and is reported by Amr ibn Auf. The Prophet, of course, looking as a person who is advising his people and in a very far-sighted way, that it's not poverty actually which he fears for his people. It is actually abundance in wealth, because this is something which can make us forget God. When we are in straitened circumstances, when we live in circumstances in which we have a scarce amount of food, or we may be in some other spot of bother, God is always close to our hearts because of the fact that we are always thinking of God, we are always trying to pray to Him when we are in such trying circumstances. So, the messenger of God has rightly cautioned and prodded us that when we have abundance in wealth, when we have a lot of money at our hand, when we have a lot of wealth at our hand, we tend to forget God. We tend to think that we are successful in this life, and we tend to ignore many of our responsibilities, not only towards God, but also towards our fellow human beings. And the reasoning that we give is that if God wanted us, or if God was annoyed with us, He would have put us into a lot of trial. And the fact that we are in these circumstances, it is proof enough that we are on the right. But at the same time, we ignore the fact that this is a place, this is a position in which we tend to forget that there are responsibilities that are imposed to us, on us, vis-a-vis God, and of course vis-a-vis the society that we live in. And look what the Prophet has said, that people before us were destroyed because of the fact that when they were given a lot of wealth, when they had this abundance in wealth, they became so engrossed in their circumstances. They were so happy and they were enjoying their luxurious life that they totally forgot that they have a commitment with God. They have a commitment with the society that they live in. It might be an unwritten commitment, but nonetheless it is a commitment. So the bottom line is that wealth is also a form of trial. People who are not blessed with wealth often think that how fortunate are the people who are wealthy, and they don't realize that this might be an apparent case of being fortunate. As far as the real case of being fortunate is concerned, this is something we can never know, because as has been cautioned by our Prophet, beloved Prophet, that wealth may take us away from God. Of course, this is not something of a rule of thumb. It is a case in which there is a potential of losing sight of God. There are many people who, in spite of being wealthy, still don't lose sight of God. They spend in the way of God. They are very God-fearing. But a majority of the people who have wealth, of course, we are talking about those people that wealth is a potential danger to one's God connection. And it is here the Prophet has rightly cautioned us and prodded us and told us that wealth is a trial. It is a bigger trial than poverty, because when we become wealthy, when we become well off, of course, as I said, that it becomes very easy for us to forget the realities of life. We tend to think that everything is going smoothly, and without realizing that there are a number of things that we might be missing. So viewers, now we come to the third part of our study circle, and this is taken from chapter number 22, verses 1 to 3 of the book of Deuteronomy, which is the fifth book of the Old Testament, the Pentateuch. So the words are, if you see your brother If you see your brother's ox or his sheep wandering, do not go away without helping, but take them back to your brother. Their owner is not near. Or if you're not certain who can, then take the beast to your house and keep it till its own owner comes in search of it. And then you are to give it back to him. Do the same with his ass or his robe or anything which has gone from your brother's keeping, and which you have come across. Do not keep it yourself. So, of course, this is something that is of a very common act of kindness that it comes naturally to us, that when we find a thing which has been lost by some of our brethren, some of the people that we know, it's very but it's natural to wait and find the owner. Keeping that lost thing for our own self or to use it to our own advantage is not the right thing. And this is where we are told that we must regard people who are our brethren to be as if they are our family, and we have to care for them as if they are our family, remembering that when we feel for others the way we feel for our near ones, it is here that we realize that when people are around us and when they are in a spot of bother, and this is just an example that, and it's a very, very ordinary example, that a person might have lost something, and of course, since the society in those times was a society which was in which animal husbandry, and it was an agrarian society in which sheep and flock were kept. So the example, of course, is something which is taken out right from their own society, that if they find the ox or sheep or camel or any animal which is, of course, of immense value to their friend or their neighbor, and they find that it's wandering away and they have come across it, then it's their duty to give it back to its owner and not keep it to themselves. And so this is because of the fact that the society in the pre-Islamic society as well was a society in which this was a very common feature. So the Prophet Moses is actually giving us this advice, and he gave this advice to his own people as well, that we have to act as the custodians of the things of other people. And this is something which only can come into being in a society where people care for other people, where people really think that they are people who can help out other people in whatever form they can. We must remember that as human beings, our duty towards other human beings is something which should come naturally to us. We have to think about others the way we think about our own family. Remember, the message of Islam, as has been put forth by the Quran itself in Surah Nisa, is that we are the progeny of one husband and wife. We are the progeny of one parent. Therefore, our own connection with our own brethren is like that of a huge family. We might be distantly related, but the fact is that our mother and father, the progenitors of humankind, are the same. And so therefore, we have to feel for other people, and we have to think of them, and we must not always think that if people are far away from us and if they are suffering in lands which are maybe 1,000 or 5,000 miles from our own selves, then they are not our concern. No, this should not be the case. We should consider ourselves to be global citizens. We are part of a global family, and if we are part of a global family, then we have to feel for this global family just as we feel for our own selves. And this is something very ordinary that we can do. In fact, as we have been discussing this, as far as possible, we have to extend our help. We have to go beyond our own thinking. It's mostly our own future, our own children, our own belongings, and our own needs that we always think about. Of course, this is not something that we should not, but at the same time, we have to think of others as well. This is something of a civic duty. It is a duty of a person who is related to his fellow human being because of the fact that they share the same bond of humanity. Because we now go on to the last part of our study circle, and this is a small discussion or a small note that we're going to put forth, and vis-a-vis the topic is that countering hate. So the society in which we live in, of course, we find people who are jealous of us. We find people who do not like us. They go as far as hating us. They become our rivals. They plot against us. They do a number of things which might harm us. But look what the Quran has said in countering hate. It says, "Idfa' billati hiya ahsan, فَإِذَا الَّذِي بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَهُ عَدَاوَةٌ كَأَنَّهُ وَلِيٌّ حَمِيمٌ." Which means that when someone hates you, when someone does a bad deed to you, you don't do so. In fact, you requite this bad deed by the opposite. If someone is jealous of you, if someone hates you, if someone is plotting to pin you down, you, on the other hand, don't do so. In fact, what you do is that you help out people. You help people in distress. There are people who might be your enemies, but remember, you have to be just to your enemies as well. Showing justice to your enemies, showing justice to people who hate you, so showing justice to people who rival you. This is what the Quran wants. This is the supreme morality that all of us must adhere to. It's easy to be just to good people. The most difficult part is to be just to people who hate you. And there are so many times that when we in absentia have a lot of position of strength in which we can actually put our rival to shame, we can really put him to shame, or her to shame. But the fact is that when this time arises, that there is this possibility and this option that you have, that you can encourage your rival, you can actually present some of his good qualities before other people. We should do that, because in order to win over our enemies, in order to win our foes, in order to counter hate, we have to retaliate in a very affectionate way, in a very positive way, in which we actually try to counter this hate through a lot of love. Remember, people melt if they are given love. And if we have to try to conquer our enemies, we have to conquer their hearts. And to conquer their hearts, we have to show love to them. We have to show affection to them. We have to become soft to them. We should encourage them. We should present their good qualities in their absence if the need arises. We have to be just to them. We have to, in fact, we have to treat them as if we treat any person who we think is our friend. So treating friends in a good way is easy, but treating enemies and rivals in an extremely salubrious way is something that is very difficult. And it is here that we have to rise to the occasion. We have to think that instead of countering hate with hate, we have to counter hate with love. We have to conquer the hearts of people. And people, however much stone-hearted they may appear, their hearts too melt. It's just a question of being persistent in our good behavior. It's just a question of sticking and adhering to our good behavior. It's just a question of time. And soon or late, they do succumb to this fate of changing their attitude. And of course, there are extreme examples in which this change might not occur, but then it is our duty as far as we can to play our part, because changing the hearts of people is not always in our hands. It's in the hands of God. So if we do our part, there's all the more possibility and all the more reason that God also will hopefully help us in this regard. So with this, with these small premises and these small presentations, I would now open this discussion for any questions that you might have, and you are free to ask questions.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Sham Kazi, please go on.
My question is not related to topic,
Mm-hmm.
but wanted to ask regarding one particular incident in Quran.
Mm-hmm.
It's regarding when there was a discussion between Hazrat Ibrahim and God, and Hazrat Ibrahim requested for a proof that or a discussion related to that,
Mm-hmm.
the proof from afterlife. And then there's this incident where
Mm-hmm.
a bird is made into pieces, and pieces are put in there. So just wondering, considering somebody who was directly having a conversation with God, and so just imagine how clear that would be, that there's a creator, and whatever the creator is saying, that there's an afterlife and there will be a day of judgment.
Mm-hmm.
So why he requested for that, and the word used is something like sakune kalb, or clarity of kalb, something like that. I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your take on that?
So you see, it's not that the Prophet Abraham was not convinced of the hereafter, because you remember that when prophets of God are faced with animosity and with people who are creating doubts, and they are raising all sorts of objections, so it's just a question of assurance of the heart, because you see the words used by Prophet Abraham was liyatma'inna qalbi, so that I receive assurance of my heart. You see, the mind is the seat of intellect, and the heart is the seat in which you have that emotional support and assurance. So, as far as Abraham's mind was concerned, of course, he was totally convinced of the hereafter, and because being a prophet of God, he had no doubts about that. The area in which he actually said was that he would like to be someone whose heart is assured of this. So the words, as I said, are you know what actually God asked him, and he said, "Avalam tu'min? Don't you believe in this?" So Abraham said, "Kalu bala walakin liyatma'inna qalbi." I do believe in the fact that we are going to be raised in the hereafter, but the fact is that my heart needs further assurance, and it was because of this further assurance that the Almighty relented, and He actually then gave that example in which He actually had those birds severed and they slaughtered, and they were placed on 4 opposite mountains, and then when they were called by Abraham, they came on even after being declared dead, and because of the fact that the Almighty had to show this, that life after death is something of a possibility. So you see, the prophets of God, when they are presented with various ordeals, remember they are in contact with God, and the fact that the problem in which they are passing through is also severe. The heart at times does need this assurance because of the fact that the onslaught of the enemy is very strong, and at times you yourself are convinced of something, and it's just that you would like your emotional self to be satisfied as well. So this was more of an emotional satisfaction, as you can see from the words of Abraham as well, and God actually took them towards this end as well, because remember what He said, "Avalam tu'min, don't you believe in this?" And because of the fact that belief is something which relates to our own intellect, Abraham said, "Bala, I do, but I just need this assurance." So it's not a question of any intellectual doubt that he may have had. It was just a question of this personal satisfaction.
Sure. Okay. I have further question, but the other person can proceed, and then I can.
Right. So it's Adila Asad. Can you please? Can you? If you have a question, please proceed.
Assalamualaikum, Shehzad sir.
Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
My question is a little personal. It's a personal nature. I want to know, like, few years ago, I was like a very normal human being, normal Muslim. For few years, like for past 6 years maybe, I've been to religion. I study a lot of Quran. I've always studied Quran, but not in this depth, the way I'm doing it now.
Right.
And for the people from my family and people around me, they keep kind of discouraging me in a way that, why do you need to do it this way? What is the purpose? What is the point of this? So actually now the question arises in me too, that why am I doing this? And if I don't do this now, will I be doing some kind of what should I say? If Allah has kind of brought me closer to the religion, if I stay away now, not completely stay away, I was always religious, but leave all this, then will I be committing a sin?
So you see, this is a question which is faced by every single human being, because you see, this is a form of trial as well, that to come closer to God is something which we have to strive for, and if for some reason we have stumbled upon this opportunity that we are able to take out more time for this purpose, we should consider ourselves to be lucky, because you see, there are so many people in this world, which I'm sure you must be knowing. I know many people who, in spite of the fact that they would like to try and give time to their religious obligations and their religious duties, which of course are the same, they are your duties or their obligations which relate to your own soul. You see, just as you nourish your own body, your own physical being, by eating and by drinking and by other means, so your soul also needs nourishment. And if you don't provide that nourishment to your soul, it's going to become weak and weak and weak and dwindle. And the gravest form of a soul becoming weak is that it loses this distinction between good and evil, and it starts to dwindle between good and evil and hesitate between good and evil, you see. So the thing is that we don't have a choice. We have a physical being, we have a spiritual being. So when we nourish ourselves by bringing us closer to God and studying religion, we are in fact nourishing our spiritual being. And if we don't do so, then because of the fact that this spiritual being does need some nourishment, it will then get nourished from something other than our own rightful thing. So consider the fact that if you don't give the right food to your soul, then it will start eating junk food, which of course is going to sustain it, but it's going to be harmful, just as junk food is harmful to our own physical being. So it's a thirst that our spiritual being has, and if you don't supply that thirst to your spiritual being, then it's going to fulfill that requirement through some dirty water or through some other contaminated drink. So I think it's not a question of an option, it's a question of an obligation we have towards our own spiritual being. If we had been animals about which we can, there is this contention that they don't have a soul, they're merely physical in their stature, that would have been an entirely different ball game. Because of the fact that we have a soul, we have a spirit, we have a spiritual part of our existence, we have to nurture that physical part. So if we don't, that spiritual part, if we don't nurture that spiritual part, it's going to produce a lot of bad results in our own life. So I think that you have taken the right decision, you should stick to it, and you should think that this is something that you are doing to nourish your spiritual soul, your spiritual part. If you don't do so, you'll have to face a lot of difficult times in life, because you see, as I said, the first thing which happens when you lose your spiritual part is that this distinction between good and evil, it starts to get blurred. It becomes fizzy and fuzzy, and you end up as if you don't have this distinction or this awareness between you.
So sometimes they ask me this question, what's the difference in you from before and now? And I really can't see the difference.
You don't have to. You see, I think this is a question which people might have, and they have to ask you, because of the fact that this change is something which is more internal. You see, you become stronger in your decisions, you become stronger in distinguishing between right and wrong. You always question whether I'm doing something which is right or wrong, and it is here that you are helped a lot. You see, when you become a spiritual person, you always think that whatever I'm going to do in the next instant, is it morally right or wrong? So you see, it's more a question of making decisions vis-a-vis a lot of moral situations that you would be faced with. So the change that perhaps becomes perceptible is that you become very, very attentive to the fact that I should not take a wrong decision vis-a-vis morality. So immoral decisions or unethical decisions, they become something of a lot of importance to you. And I think that is something that all of us should strive for.
So to understand it more, like before, so I'm just giving you an example. If I'm going out somewhere and it's going to be Asr time or a Maghrib time, I would just go and just come back and say my prayer, and I knew that I am going to pray. But now, if I have to go out and it's a Maghrib time, I wouldn't want to go out. This is the difference I see in myself.
Okay, so you see, this is something which relates to a particular situation. Like, for example, what should you do if you're faced with this ordeal that you're going out and you might miss your prayer? I think that's a very small aspect of the whole situation, although it's an important one, given the fact that a believer is always worried that he or she might miss the prayer. So you see, in that particular area, you need to go more deeper into a religion and need to realize that religion gives you this option of combining your prayer. It gives you this option that you can even pray on your transport, for example, in your car, so that you don't miss your prayer. So in that particular area, you need perhaps to improve your knowledge regarding what your obligations are and how they can be fulfilled. But I think that the stronger area in which you have to become a person of integrity is that you become more involved and more attentive towards moral issues. You think that at times we just overstate things, we understate things, we exaggerate things. In other words, we are not very precise in stating the truth. So a person who becomes spiritually strong is always worried that his tongue or her tongue should not utter something which is not the truth, or which is beyond the truth, or which is half the truth. So I think these things which relate more to our conduct, they should become a worry. And a person who becomes religious is one who, besides being very punctual in his or her rituals, of course, they have their own importance, but at the same time, he or she is worried that something wrong, morally wrong, which is, for example, telling a lie, for example, hurting someone, for example, showing rudeness to someone or violating the law. So all these things which are ethically and morally wrong, they become a real issue with us. And I think this is something that should happen. And people, if they think that this is the change that has occurred in you, then of course this is something that should take place.
Yeah, that's the change only I think I can know. Basically, it's becoming a good person. Like, for example, my cousin, he gives me this argument all the time that instead of wasting, he thinks it's a waste of time. I don't think so. Instead of wasting your time on this, because there's so much literature on religion already, so there's no point of reading more. You have read one translation, two translation, that's more than enough. Why don't you go and study something else and do something else?
You see, reading the Quran and translating the Quran and understanding the Quran with the translation is a constant need. You just cannot give it up by saying that you've read the translation once and that is all. It's not an ordinary book. For an ordinary book, you might read it once or twice, but the Quran is something that each time you read the Quran, you find more depth, you discover something new in the Quran. And it's not just a meaning. You see, one of the aspects of reading the Quran is it gives you this strength of faith, which makes you a person who is stronger in faith, a person who is more God-oriented. So remember that the Quran not only guides you vis-a-vis a lot of things in life, it gives you this spiritual energy, I would say, this spiritual strength, which makes you a person who has a strong belief in God, who accepts the decisions of God. Whenever bad things happen, patience and steadfastness come more easier to that person. So you see, it's not just having a simple reading of the Quran, it's actually deriving that strength that is needed by us, all of us, the strength of personality, which also is a product of reading the Quran.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So basically, if I'm going towards this path, it's the right path, then I should.
Of course, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so we have. Okay, I think Hashim, you said you can go on perhaps with the question that you had.
Yeah. One question I wanted to ask was regarding Surah Yusuf. It's related to that event of the woman and the Yusuf. So this one particular verse where the translation in Urdu is, हकीकत ये है कि उस औरत ने तो यूसुफ का इरादा कर ही लिया था, वो भी अगर परवरदिगार की बुरहान ना देख लेता तो उसका इरादा कर लेता. So just wanted to understand what does this exactly means, that परवरदिगार की बुरहान, or the the proof of his Lord. So what is this exact?
So you see the
difference that
right.
From a will,
So,
yeah.
the Quran has actually described the fact that sexual impulse is something, when we are confronted with it, it's very difficult for us to evade it, especially when the opportunity is such that no one is seeing and you can just succumb to your desire. So the Quran actually says that if a person has protected his inner self in circumstances in which he or she has made this commitment that I will not fall for such things, I will not be allured by such things. In other words, this strength of character is something which he or she has kept on preserving. So when difficult times come, when it looks as if it would be very difficult for a person to not succumb to such a situation, it is here that God Almighty sends His special help. So the Arabic words are وَلَقَدْ هَمَّتْ بِهِ وَهَمَّ بِهَا لَوْلَا أَنْ رَأَى بُرْهَانَ رَبِّي, that he would have fallen for her and she would have fallen for him had Yusuf not seen the Burhan of God. And the Burhan of God actually is this divine help in which He protects a person who takes it upon himself to preserve his chastity and modesty, and who in normal circumstances is a person who is always modest and chaste. So what happens is that when trying circumstances come, this special help of the Almighty arises, because in normal circumstances we have fulfilled our responsibility and we have tried our best to preserve ourselves. But when circumstances are such that there is always this danger that we might fall in these circumstances, so the Almighty actually spends His special help, and at that particular time one is able to gather oneself, and he or she does not succumb to that evil temptation. So the burhan here is actually that divine help, that divine proof, which of course the word proof is mentioned here, but the implication is that God actually at that very instant alerted Joseph or Yusuf, and he instead of being tempted and being led away, at once gathered himself, and he became a person who shrugged off that thing. So this is the special help of God, which is spelled out in these words.
Sure. Okay. I have another question, if I may.
Yes, please proceed.
Is this related to prayers practice? Why in Zohar and Asr the recitation is not done? What's the question?
So you see, because of the fact that we have not been given any answer from the Prophet himself or any of the Sahaba, all that we can do is make an educated guess that why is it that in the Asr and the Zohar prayer the recital is not loud, while in the Fajr, Maghrib and the Isha prayer it is to the contrary. So one of the explanations which has been offered by some scholars is that if you look at the time of the day, so times of the day which are quieter, especially in the Arab society, the tribal Arab society, Fajr was a quiet time of the day, so was Maghrib and Isha, at least in those times. So the recital has been loud, so that because of the peace that prevails, you are able to gauge what an Imam is saying, and it affects your hearts. The Zohar and Asr times were times in which, because of the activity of the day, because of the fact that you were involved in a lot of things, and of course the noise element was always there, so it was deemed more appropriate that the recital should be silent. So this is one of the, I don't say that this is something of the ultimate sort in explaining this, but this is one thing that does carry some weight, and unless some other explanation comes to us which is even more convincing, I find this to be quite satisfying. But as I said, this is one place in which we have no answer either from God or from the Prophet, because in such cases any reasoning that we could have had from the originators of the Sharia themselves would have been the ultimate, because the Sharia is silent on this particular matter, so this is how we try to understand it. But as I said, that this could be just a possible answer.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, so I don't think that we have any further questions. So thank you.
Sir, I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I have-
Oh, this is Mrs. Yasin Fahad. Okay, please go
Yes.
ahead. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to know that whenever Allah sends His messengers, there are two ways we said He settles the punishment for the nations. Either it comes from the Allah Himself through the angels, or is it, as in was in the case of Prophet Muhammad, that it was done with the hands of the believers and the Prophet himself. I want to know, in Bani Israel, has there ever been a time where the same thing happened with the prophets or the messengers of the Bani Israel, that the punishment was delivered with the hands of the believers at that time? Or one
No,
of the
this is
prophets?
the only example that we have prior to the Prophet Muhammad is that of Moses. And in between there is no such example, because most of the messengers or envoys of God between Moses and Jesus, of course, they were basically, except in certain situations, they were not messengers, they were prophets of God, they were Anbiya. And we know that contrary to the messengers of God, the Anbiya do not enforce punishment. They do present the message of God, but their message is not something which curtails in the worldly retribution of their addressees.
So basically, there is no example similar to Prophet Muhammad
except Moses, except Moses.
But in Moses' case, Pharaoh was punished by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what are we referring to when we
but
say
we know that the Israelites were also punished for there. You see, it's not just the case that the Quran says that he was sent to the Pharaoh, and he was of course sent to his own nation as well. So although the fact that then they were given this task of subjugating their enemy, so what we know from the Old Testament and from the Quran is that they did not fulfill the obligation which was imposed of them on them, and they said, "Fazhab anta wa rabbaka faqatila." Go, Moses, go you and your Lord and fight with your enemy. We are going to stay here. So the punishment which actually was first given to the followers of that generation who refused to fight, and for 40 years they wandered in the desert. And once that first generation was destroyed, only then was the next generation under Joshua, who was the caliph right after Moses, or the leader right after Moses, did the Israelites enter the land of Canaan. And then, of course, they had this jihad which they waged with various tribes. Some of these tribes, they even lost their because of some misplanning, but this jihad actually went on after Moses. But the fact is that because of the fact that they had given this answer to Moses that they would not fight, because the people living in Canaan were too strong and too big for them to handle, so they were given this punishment actually.
Yeah, but so in that case also the punishment was given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like he said, they will remain, they will not be able to enter that city for the next 40 years.
Right.
And then they will be.
Mm-hmm.
But there was no punishment that was given to the disbelievers by the hands of Moses alayhi salam or Bani Israel.
So you see, it was because the only thing was it was delayed by 40 years. So
okay. Okay, so it was not done at the time of Moses alayhi salam, but it was
done later on.
I understand. Thank you, sir.
Okay. So thank you very much, viewers, for your kind participation, and inshallah we'll see each other next week on the same time. Until then, it is Khuda Hafiz.